What happens to the human soul the moment after death? And more mysteriously, where was the Son of God for 72 hours? Between Good Friday's crucifixion and Easter Sunday's resurrection lies a period shrouded in mystery, a time that most churches barely mention in their sermons. But here's what will shock you. Ancient texts describe a journey to the underworld, a cosmic mission to realms that most people never even consider exist. Catholics believe one thing. Protestants teach another. Orthodox traditions tell a completely different story. And the truth? The truth is far more extraordinary than what most churches dare to teach their congregations. Because during those 3 days, something happened that would change the afterlife forever. Something that involved the rescue of souls, the defeat of death itself, and a journey that makes Dante's Inferno look like a children's story. For nearly 2,000 years, a 72-hour period has remained one of Christianity's most debated mysteries. The timeline seems straightforward enough. Jesus was crucified on what we now call Good Friday, hastily buried before the Jewish Sabbath began at sunset, and discovered missing from his tomb early Sunday morning by Mary Magdalene and the other women. But what happened during those 3 days and nights when his body lay in Joseph of Arimathea's borrowed tomb? Where was his spirit, his soul, his divine essence during this time? To understand the magnitude of this question, we need to grasp what death meant in first-century Palestine. The Jewish people had a complex understanding of the afterlife, believing in Sheol, a shadowy underworld where all the dead, both righteous and wicked, waited in separate compartments. Unlike the Greek concept of immediate judgment, Jewish theology taught that souls descended to this realm of the dead, where Abraham's bosom provided comfort for the righteous, while the wicked suffered in torment. The Romans, who controlled the region, had their own beliefs about death and the underworld, influenced heavily by Greek mythology and philosophy. The disciples, traumatized and scattered after witnessing their master's brutal execution, had no framework for understanding what was happening. They had expected Jesus to overthrow Roman rule and establish an earthly kingdom, not die as a common criminal. The women who discovered the empty tomb that Sunday morning found not just missing remains, but a mystery that would require centuries of theological development to even begin to comprehend. The early Christian community desperately needed answers, not just for their own peace of mind, but to explain to a skeptical world how their crucified leader could possibly be the promised Messiah. This isn't merely an academic question. The Apostles' Creed, recited by millions of Christians every Sunday, contains the startling phrase, "He descended into hell," a statement that has sparked theological debates, denominational splits, and countless scholarly treatises. The implications are staggering. If Jesus truly died as both God and man, what does death mean for the divine? How can an immortal being experience mortality? And if he went somewhere during those 3 days, the consequences of that journey would reshape humanity's understanding of death, salvation, and the afterlife forever. The moment Jesus breathed his last words, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," the natural world itself seemed to revolt. Matthew's Gospel records that darkness fell over the land, the earth shook violently, rocks split apart, and most remarkably, the massive temple veil that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom. This wasn't just any piece of fabric. It was a curtain so thick that tradition says it would take 300 priests to move it, and its destruction symbolized something unprecedented happening in the spiritual realm. Joseph of Arimathea, a secret disciple and member of the Jewish ruling council, made a bold and dangerous move by requesting Jesus' body from Pontius Pilate. Roman crucifixion was designed to be a lingering, public humiliation. Bodies were typically left on crosses for days as a warning to others. But Jewish law demanded burial before sunset on the Sabbath, creating an urgent timeline. Joseph and Nicodemus hurriedly prepared the body with 75 pounds of spices and wrapped it in linen cloths, then sealed it in Joseph's own new tomb carved from rock. They rolled a massive stone across the entrance, and at the request of nervous Jewish leaders, Roman soldiers were posted to guard it. But here's where the mystery truly begins to unfold. The four gospel writers, usually meticulous about Jesus' words and actions, become strangely quiet about this period. Luke mentions Jesus' promise to the dying thief, "Today you will be with me in paradise," but offers no explanation of what paradise meant or where it was located. John focuses on the physical details of the crucifixion and burial, but provides no insight into the spiritual dimension of Jesus' death. Mark and Matthew record the events, but leave a gaping hole in their narrative between the burial and resurrection. Early Christian writings outside the New Testament began filling in these blanks with tantalizing hints. The Gospel of Peter, though not accepted as canonical, describes supernatural phenomena during those 3 days. Later church fathers like Clement of Alexandria and Origen wrote extensively about Jesus' activities during this period, drawing from both scripture and oral traditions passed down from the apostles. These accounts spoke of journeys to spiritual realms, encounters with Old Testament saints, and cosmic battles between good and evil. The disciples themselves were in complete disarray during this time, hiding behind locked doors in fear that they too would be arrested and executed. They had witnessed their master perform countless miracles, raise the dead, and claim to be the Son of God, yet now he lay cold and still in a tomb. Their Jewish understanding of death told them that if someone was truly dead for 3 days, there was no hope of return. The soul had departed for Sheol, and the body would begin to decay. But if Jesus was who he claimed to be, could death really hold him? And if he conquered death, what was he doing during those silent hours that would change everything? 03. Main event: the Great Descent. What happened during those 3 days has been the subject of fierce theological debate for nearly 2 millennia, with different Christian traditions painting vastly different pictures of Christ's activities between death and resurrection. The most dramatic and widely held view, embraced by Catholic and Orthodox churches, describes nothing short of a cosmic rescue mission to the very depths of hell itself. According to this tradition, the moment Jesus died, his human soul descended into the underworld, not as a victim, but as a conqueror. Picture this: the Son of God, bearing the keys of death and hell, marching through the gates of Hades like a victorious general entering enemy territory. This wasn't a place of torment for Christ, but rather the holding area where all the righteous dead from the Old Testament had been waiting: Abraham, Moses, David, Isaiah, and countless others who had died in faith, but before the gates of heaven could be opened through Christ's sacrifice. The biblical basis for this breathtaking narrative comes primarily from 1 Peter 3 verses 18 to 20, which states that Christ went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, who formerly did not obey. Peter 4:6 adds that the gospel was proclaimed even to the dead. These cryptic verses have been interpreted to mean that Jesus spent those 3 days preaching to the souls of the dead, offering salvation to those who had never heard the gospel message. Imagine the scene: patriarchs and prophets who had spent centuries in the shadowy realm of Sheol suddenly seeing the Messiah they had prophesied about standing before them in brilliant glory. Eastern Orthodox tradition goes even further, describing this event as the harrowing of hell, a term that conjures images of Christ literally breaking down the gates of death. Their iconography depicts Jesus standing triumphantly over broken chains and shattered locks, pulling Adam and Eve by the hands out of their tombs, while Satan lies defeated beneath his feet. In this view, Christ's descent was the moment when death itself was conquered, when the power of hell was broken forever, and when paradise was finally open to humanity. Protestant theology, however, offers a strikingly different interpretation. Many Protestant scholars argue that when Jesus told the dying thief, "Today you will be with me in paradise," he meant exactly that. Both souls went immediately to heaven. In this view, the phrase "descended into hell" in the Apostles' Creed doesn't refer to a literal journey to the underworld, but rather to Christ experiencing the spiritual agony of separation from God while bearing humanity's sins on the cross. His soul, they argue, went directly to the Father, while his body remained in the tomb. Some Protestant traditions embrace an even more radical interpretation: soul sleep. According to this view, Jesus experienced true human death in every sense. His consciousness ceased, his soul slept in the grave alongside his body, and the resurrection 3 days later was a complete renewal of both body and spirit. This perspective sees death as a temporary, unconscious state, making Christ's resurrection not a return from another realm, but an awakening from the deepest sleep possible. Adding to the mystery are ancient extra-biblical sources that describe this period in vivid detail. The Gospel of Nicodemus, though not part of the biblical canon, contains an elaborate account of Jesus' activities in hell, complete with dialogue between Christ and Satan, descriptions of the underworld's geography, and testimonies from Old Testament figures about their liberation. Medieval Christian art and literature expanded on these themes, creating epic narratives of cosmic warfare between good and evil in the depths of hell. Archaeological discoveries have added another layer to this mystery. Ancient Christian art in Roman catacombs depicts scenes that appear to show Christ's descent into hell, suggesting that this belief was widespread among the earliest Christian communities. These images show figures in dark places being led toward light, broken chains, and triumphant scenes of liberation that align remarkably well with later theological developments about the harrowing of hell. 04. Immediate aftermath. The world changed forever. When Mary Magdalene arrived at the tomb that Sunday morning before dawn, she expected to find a sealed grave and Roman guards standing watch. Instead, she discovered something that would shatter every assumption about life, death, and the nature of reality itself. The massive stone had been rolled away, not cracked or broken, but moved aside as if it weighed nothing at all. The Roman guards, elite soldiers trained never to abandon their posts under penalty of death, had fled in terror. The tomb was empty, containing only the carefully folded grave clothes that had wrapped Jesus' body. Mary's immediate reaction was logical but completely wrong. She assumed someone had stolen the body. Her frantic report to Peter and John set off a chain of events that would transform a small group of terrified disciples into the most influential movement in human history. When Peter and John raced to the tomb, they found exactly what Mary had described, an empty burial chamber with the linen wrapping still in place, as if the body had simply vanished from within them. John's Gospel records that when John saw this evidence, he believed, though what exactly he believed at that moment remains unclear, since the disciples still didn't understand the resurrection. The emotional and psychological toll on Jesus' followers during those first hours after the discovery cannot be overstated. These people had watched their master die a gruesome death, had seen his lifeless body placed in the tomb, and had spent 3 days in crushing despair. Now they faced an impossible situation that challenged everything they thought they knew about death. When Jesus first appeared to them that evening, their reaction wasn't immediate joy but terror. Luke records that they thought they were seeing a ghost. The Jesus who stood before them was unmistakably their Lord, complete with the nail wounds in his hands and feet, yet something fundamental had changed about him. The Jewish authorities' response reveals just how unprecedented this situation was. Instead of investigating the empty tomb or demanding answers from the Roman guards, they immediately began spreading the story that the disciples had stolen the body while the soldiers slept. This official explanation was so weak that it required bribing the guards and threatening them with protection from Pilate's wrath if the governor heard they had fallen asleep on duty. The very fact that the religious leaders felt compelled to fabricate this cover story suggests they knew something extraordinary had occurred, something that threatened the very foundations of their authority. The Roman soldiers' reaction was perhaps most telling of all. These were men trained to face death without flinching, yet whatever they witnessed at the tomb left them in such terror that they abandoned their post and fled. Matthew's Gospel describes them as becoming like dead men from fear when an angel appeared and rolled back the stone. Their subsequent acceptance of bribes to spread the theft story indicates they were desperate to avoid any further involvement in events they couldn't explain or control. But the most significant immediate aftermath wasn't the empty tomb or the terrified guards. It was the complete transformation of Jesus' followers. The same disciples who had hidden behind locked doors in fear just days earlier suddenly became bold proclaimers of the resurrection. Peter, who had denied knowing Jesus 3 times during the crucifixion, now stood before the same Jewish authorities who had condemned his master and fearlessly proclaimed that God had raised Jesus from the dead. This wasn't gradual change over months or years. It happened within days of the resurrection, suggesting they had witnessed something so overwhelming that it erased their terror and replaced it with unshakable conviction. The ripple effects spread rapidly through Jerusalem and beyond. The early chapters of Acts describe thousands of Jews converting to Christianity within weeks of the resurrection, despite the obvious dangers of associating with this new movement. The same religious authorities who had successfully orchestrated Jesus' execution found themselves powerless to stop the spread of resurrection claims. They could arrest the apostles, threaten them, even execute some of them, but they couldn't produce the one thing that would have ended the movement instantly: Jesus' body.